Model Making Guru is sponsored by emodels.co.uk, your one-stop shop for all your model making needs. emodels.co.uk. Make something awesome. Hey everyone, it's Foxx from Model Making Guru here. Hello, how you doing? How you doing? Just a different kind of video from me today. You can see here in my hand I have a very, very delightful Harder Steenbeck Evolution airbrush. I'm having thoughts. Sadly, it's not mine to keep or play with. It's not even for me to, do a review on. This has been sent in by the owner to the retailer who got it from. Because he got it and he tried it and it was having some issues, and he sent it back and said, can you just check this airbrush, and it doesn't seem to be working right and I don't know what's going on. So they've asked me to do a quick test on this brush, see if I can replicate the problem, what the problem might be, and see if I can figure out if it's a problem with the brush, in which case it'll need to be replaced, or if it's just something else and not the brush that's having an issue. So what we're going to be doing today is testing this. Now, the person that bought it says that he used Revell acrylics mixed with 2:1 with Revell aqua thinner using a syringe, which is, means he gets the right mix. And he tried it with both the 0.2 and the 0.4mm needles and nozzle sets. This comes with both, which is really cool, 0.4 and a 0.2mm. And he said it was spraying, but he was getting paint splatting off. He also says he used White Ultimate Primer with the 0.4 needle and nozzle. And again, he was getting splats. Now, that can be a number of different things, but we'll need to do some quick checks and see if I can replicate it first. I will say 99% of the time, problems with an airbrush is down to cleaning. So we'll find out. We'll see what happens. Might not be. It might be, a shonky seal or a plunky nozzle or something like that. We'll find out. But for today, we're going to be using, obviously, this airbrush, obvs. And I'm going to be using, I have some bad news. My plucky little compressor has been retired.
Pika pika!
Yes. Now, this is where I have to apologise and get my words out. Apologise ridiculously profusely to the relevant person here, because late last year, one of my absolutely lovely followers sent me a compressor as a gift, as a thank you for all my videos. If I remember rightly, it's a TC20T. It's a big boy compressor, so I can change the pressure, and it's got a moisture trap and everything. Yes, it's dead quiet. It's quieter than my little plucky compressor. And I'm going to be using that because then I can try different various pressures. I finally got the power adapter for it because it's US 110 volts, so I finally got that and I can use it now. Yeah, and it's absolutely brilliant. So yes, I'm going to be using that. I'm going to try various different pressures, and we're going to see first of all if we can replicate the fault, and then see if we can figure out what might be causing it and what needs to be done. So without further ado, let me go and get everything set up. I'll film the testing, but I'll probably just voice over it because it might be long and I don't want a dead long video, so I'll dub over that. So let's go get everything set up. Okay, so let's get testing. Right, first thing we're going to test is, well, we're going to just do the Ultimate Primer. We're going to give it a very good shake, because primers and paints, you always need to shake the living crap out of them to make sure nothing's settled. Now, this is a 0.4mm needle and nozzle, so we're going to try that one. This stuff wouldn't spray through a 0.2, highly unlikely unless you thinned it a lot. And to be honest, if you've got a brush that does 0.4 and 0.2, I'd put the primer through on the 0.4. There's no point thinning this to put it through that. You're just using thinner that you don't need to use. So we're not going to test the primer through the 0.2 because there's no point. Now, as I say, my 0.35mm Neo does fine with this neat primer, but we'll put a little bit of thinner in there just anyway, just a couple of drops. A bit of Ultimate Airbrush thinner as I knock the camera. Just a couple of drops, 3 drops, and then we'll put in some of the thinner, the primer even. Splooge. Come on out. There. Nothing's coming out. It's because I opened the wrong one. Hooray! That's my unopened bottle. Let's try again, shall we? Right. So a few drops of the primer. That'll do. Don't need a lot. Okay, so I'll just make sure that's going through. Yeah. Right, so let's see how this comes out. So, I'm just getting the paint off the nozzle. So let's try it. This is on 20 psi. 0.4mm. Okay. Well, it is fuzzy around the edges, don't get me wrong. Certainly seeing fuzz around the edges. But what I am seeing is when you hit the air, after you've sprayed some paint, when you hit the air, you get that little blob of paint. Let's try taking the crown cap off. And try it without that. So get some paint coming through, primer even, and then, yeah, so you are getting a little splop of paint as you press the trigger down for air. I'm taking the crown cap off. We're getting some nice fine lines. Taking the crown cap off actually gives me much nicer, smoother lines with less fuzz around the edge. Getting quite close. I'm getting some nice crisp lines there. That's pretty darn good for a 0.4. I can use less air. Okay, so it's working okay. We do get that little splot when we first hit the air. And we do get a little bit of fuzzy around the edge, but that's not always a bad thing. It's not always the end of the world. So, but it is going through. Big full back pull. Loads. There we go. Right, so I'm going to go and clean this out, do a colour change. And what we'll do is we'll try some paint through the 0.2mm nozzle. See what that comes out like. So let me go and clean this out. Always a challenge when it's primer. And we'll come back with the 0.2mm nozzle and some paintage. Back in a moment. Okay, now we're going to try some acrylic paint. This is red brown base from MIG. We're going to use it neat, and we're going to keep the pressure at 20 psi, just as a direct comparison to the primer that we just tried to put through. Just make sure it's all going through. Now notice I'm getting some air coming through into the cup there, which is interesting, and I am getting some back spray, some overspray. Now it's only watching this back now that I notice the bubbles coming through into the paint cup, and that normally suggests a blockage issue, which could also be causing the overspray. Overspray, basically the fuzziness around the edge, is, now here you see we're just going to add a few drops of thinner just to make it a little less thick, see if that makes a difference. The overspray is basically you've got your cone of paint coming out of the airbrush, and overspray are particles of paint that have escaped that cone and sprayed out to the side and aerosolized and dried a bit faster. So you get that fuzziness around the edge. And that would explain partially why it seems to back off the closer you get with the airbrush. Because the closer you get, the less far out the paint has got from the main cone of paint, as it were. So you're getting less overspray. Okay, now we're going to try the same paint, so it's still got a few drops of thinner in there, but we're going to drop the pressure down to 15 psi, see if it makes a difference, and straight away you get a splat there, and then it goes on quite nicely. You can see the paint's thinner. I get a couple of little almost spiders or millipedes there, almost, but it does seem to be less fuzzy. Now as I was doing these tests, I was getting some spiders and millipedes, where it splonges out and gives all these legs, but that's not down to the airbrush, that's down to me not being familiar with the particular foibles of this particular airbrush. Using any airbrush takes a little while for you to learn the sweet spots, so I'm ignoring those. Okay, now we're going to try the 0.2 nozzle. We're keeping it at 20 psi. This is neat paint. See how this fares. So we're still getting some splats. Yep, that's there. So we know it's not specific to the 0.4 needle and nozzle. And I'm doing it off camera, which is brilliant. There you go, idiot. Now you can see here with the 0.2, we instantly get a finer line anyway. I'm still quite a ways away, but we're not getting the ridiculous overspray that we were on the 0.4 nozzle. We're getting a bit of overspray, it's not perfect. I've got a spider there. Yeah, that's just me being special, that's mine to do with the airbrush. It is a little bit fuzzy, so we are getting some overspray, so it's not independent of the other needle and nozzle. Trying my best to actually write here, but still finding my feet with the actual sweet spots. Yeah, that didn't work out. But you can see we're getting good coverage. It looks pretty good. It's still a bit fuzzy, but not too bad. Okay, now we're working with slightly thinned paint. Same paint again, just a bit of thinner added. Still at 20 psi. And as before, we still get about the same, but the paint's thinner, so it looks thinner, the coverage is a bit more pale. That's normal, that's nothing to do with the airbrush itself. Not seeing any major problems. The overspray is reduced a little tiny bit, but I'm getting nice fine control there. And lastly, we'll just drop the pressure down to 15 psi and see what that does. I'm just adjusting the pressure, that's why you can't see me. I'm futzing with the thing. You can see a millipede there read earlier on. Now 15 psi, obviously less pressure, gives me a lot more control on the fine lines, but it does become more difficult to maintain that control, especially for me with a trigger, with a button. I'm used to a trigger. But you can see here, it's a bit fuzzy still, but it's all right. Now we've done those tests, let's get this thing cleaned out and see what happens. Right, let's strip this thing down and clean it. Now I've obviously done a colour change when I last sprayed it, so that's been done, but we'll give it a thorough strip down and clean. First thing we're going to do is take some, just to make sure there's no gunk in there, some isopropyl alcohol. Now this brush is listed as not necessarily solvent safe, but the materials that the packing and the seals are made of is allegedly solvent safe, but we're not going to take any risks. So we're going to take the crown cap, which is all metal, put it in isopropyl alcohol. We don't need to do the paint cut, but I'll do it anyway. There's a little seal on there, so is there a little seal on there? No, there's no little seal on there, so we'll just dump that in the isopropyl alcohol. Take the back off. Take the needle chuck off. Look at me with all my terms that I know. I'm going to pull, oh, actually no, put that back on again because I'm special. Because I need to move the needle. Take the crown off. Now there is a little seal on here, a little gasket, so we're not going to put that in the alcohol. And we'll push the needle forward, not backwards. Always push the needle out the front, so that if there is any paint on the needle, it doesn't drag it back through the rest of the brush. And we've got in there. So what we're going to do, these can soak in the alcohol, because isopropyl alcohol is by far one of the best things to get paint off for just metal parts. We can get the little nozzle out. Got the nozzle in there. So what we're going to do is we're going to take my Tamiya airbrush cleaning brushes, which are here, and an incidental tool, which is here. I'll do a quick clean, so I've got all these glass things. In here, I'm just going to put some Medea airbrush cleaner, which is a little less aggressive than isopropyl alcohol, but still does a good job. And this makes sure I don't damage anything in the process of cleaning. So the first thing we're going to do is take the big brush, and we're going to clean all around the cup here. There's a seal in there as well, so I wouldn't want to risk the seal with the isopropyl alcohol. It'll probably be fine, but it's not worth taking any risks. This isn't my brush, so it's definitely not worth taking any risks. Give it a good scrub. This is my end of day clean. This is what I do at the end of a day, or if I've been spraying, say, primer, this is what I do at the end of when I do a colour change. Work it right down into the bottom. We'll go on the outside as well. Just scrub this stuff off. Want to leave it nice and neat and tidy for Mr. Owner. So we're just going to get all that off. Get some tissue, which I haven't prepared in advance because I'm special. And there it is. Can't find my tissue. Just get some tissue, just clean that off. I'll thoroughly clean it properly on the outside when it goes back to, where it's going to, so don't worry about that. I do make a mess when I do airbrushing. Okay, so now what we're going to do is make sure in here is clean. I did see some crud in here, inside the barrel. So we're going to make sure this is thoroughly scrubbed. Oh, my brush broke. Oh well, it can still get in there. Oh, thanks to me. See what I do for you. I sacrifice my equipment. So we're going to get that in there and give it a good scrub. Get the incidental tool. If you haven't got these, go to your local chemist or Boots or anywhere. Pharmacy if you're in the States. Get some incidental tools. They're brilliant. They cost pennies and they're great for cleaning things out. Now on these Harder Steenbecks, there's a little gap. Instead of a little hole for the air, there's a little gap down the side. You won't see it, but there was some gunk in there, so I'm trying to get my brush in there properly and make sure it goes in all the way. Get it into the tube at the middle where the paint comes out. Make sure there's nothing sitting in there. Give it a good scrubbage. And I'll just get some tissue and just work my tissue into a point. Thusly, get that into the inner workings. You can see there is some crud on there. But that, you won't see on camera, but that is looking a lot cleaner than it was when I took charge of it. Where's that incidental brush gone again? Now you could do this with the isopropyl alcohol just to be absolutely get it thoroughly clean, because you're not doing it for long, but I'm not personally taking the risk. If you know for sure your brush is solvent safe, you can do this with gay abandon and just, you know, get the isopropyl alcohol all over it. It's not a problem. If you've got like a DeVille base or something that's designed for body shop work and industrial work, then they're pretty much indestructible solvents wise. So, but yeah, if you're not sure, don't use isopropyl alcohol, stick to airbrush cleaning stuff. I'm just going to make another little point of tissue, get that in there. For some reason, making points of tissue is the most frustrating thing about cleaning an airbrush. I don't know why, it just bugs me. Get the brush, get the tissue in there, make sure that's all cleaned out in there. Get a darn good scrubbage. Now, as I say, it may well be, and it can often be, see there is some stuff coming off there, it can often be that some little amount of overspray, so some fuzziness around the edge of a line with a bigger needle like a 0.4, is normal. And if you're using a 0.4 needle, you're not painting tiny details. So it's not a bad thing if there's some fuzziness. You know, you're usually using 0.4 for things like primers, thicker paints, metallics, and if you're covering a big area. So if you, any of those situations, not having a crisp, crystal clear line is not a problem, and most airbrushes won't give you that anyway. Okay, that's better. Can't believe I broke my brush. Oh. Now we're going to do the thing here, Ted nozzle. So I'll get my broken brush. Do you know? I'm just going to go around the edge and the outside on camera, obviously. Get everything off there, get everything off inside. Oops. Just give it a darn good scrubbage. I'm not going to throw this away because I can still use it. I won't be able to use it on my Neo because my Neo components are all a bit longer than these, so it would be a bit of a pig to try and get it in and wiggle it around. So we'll get that one. We'll get my tiny brush, which is this one. It's another Tamiya airbrush cleaning brush. It's just part of the Tamiya airbrush cleaning kit. This might not go through the hole. No, won't go through. And if the incidental brush will. If I can find the hole, let's do it that way. No, but it'll get into the end part. So I'll give that a good scrub. The one thing you must never do is soak things in cleaners. I say the metal parts are fine because they're just metal, it doesn't matter. But like these parts and the body of your brush, don't soak them. Don't put them in a bowl with airbrush cleaner. I'm just looking, you can't see it, but I'm just looking inside, see if I can see anything in there, and I can't. Okay, so that's clean. Have a look at the nozzle. Nozzle, you're a nozzle. We'll go back to the incidental brush for this one. See if you can get some of these from your local chemist. Brilliant. Now your nozzle will get quite a goodly collection of paint and stuff. You can see it coming out there that you can't see. So these kind of brushes, or any kind of cleaning brushes, are absolutely vital for making sure everything's as it should be. So yeah, the 0.2 nozzle, that's fine. There's not a problem with that one. And I'll talk about, you know, paints and pressures and stuff at the end. So what the chap was experiencing may just be down to pressure and paint type. Now, as I say, I've not used the Revell Aqua colours and I've not used their thinners, but you know my opinion of Revell. It's not the best. Now what I can do now is put that on there very carefully, hold it in place, and just dip the end in the alcohol, keeping the seal away from the alcohol, just to make sure. So very carefully. Now you have to be super careful with the nozzles, because if you bend or ding or crack the nozzle end, you're knackered. You have to buy a new nozzle. And they're only usually brass or something similar, so they're usually quite soft. So be very, very gentle with the nozzle. Get some tissue in there. Get it in. This would hopefully go down to the end of the nozzle. And there you go. Nothing coming off, just a bit of damp. So that's the nozzle. And then last of all, we have these parts here, you see. I can just clean these with a brush. So you've got the paint cup, which again has no rubber seals on it, so it's not a problem. Many airbrushes do have rubber seals on the cups, and people panic because they fall apart within about 5 minutes. Yeah, it's kind of normal. My water had a rubber seal ring on the paint cup. It degraded in the first day, but it didn't make any difference to the operations of the brush. Dry that off. So this will be your thorough end of day clean. You don't have to do it, but I'm quite fastidious with my airbrush because I can't afford to replace it every 5 minutes. You know what I'm like with airbrushes. So I tend to do this at the end of every day just because it makes life easier. Now for the crown cap, see if we can pick up the brushes. There you go. Right, so that's that done. Doesn't take much to clean the crown cap, it's just a smooth metal surface. The only thing left to clean now is the needle itself. So let me get another. I don't know why, I just find making these little pinnacles of tissue really, really annoying. I don't know why. That's that done. So last of all, we've got the needle, and for this I'll need the cotton buds, which are here. And for this I can use the isopropyl because it is, if I can pick the needle up, it's only a metal part. Now obviously be careful with the needle, don't ding your end. Getting your thinner and just gently work it. Don't go right to the end, otherwise the obvious dingage will happen. What I tend to do at the end, so you can see all the stuff coming off there. What I tend to do at the end is roll the brush, so I'm rolling it in my hand, and run it gently along the cotton bud. So when you get to the end, you're just rolling it along. Because if you go like this, the likelihood is you'll jam the end of the needle into the cotton bud, ding your end of your needle, and that's your needle ruined and you have to get a new one. But for needles, paint cups, crown caps, any components that are just pure metal and don't have any seals or O-rings on them, you can't beat isopropyl alcohol. It's the fastest way of cleaning. It gets rid of everything. Even gets rid of Citadel paints, and they're really hard to get off. Okay, so that's that done. So we're just going to run that along a piece of tissue gently. Again, downwards. I don't want to jab the needle into anything. And trust me, you don't want to jab it into your hand because that thing goes through to the bone. Trust me on that. So that's all the parts clean, thoroughly clean. So we can reassemblage. Now I always like to put the crown and crown cap on first to avoid needle dingage. So get the nozzle back in the crown. I do like this assembly of the nozzle. It's so easy. Make sure this is on really tightly. You have to squash the little O-ring in the middle, otherwise you don't make a perfect seal, and then you'll get bubbles in your cup, or you'll get paint coming out. If you've got really thin product going through it, you'll get it coming out the sides. We'll get the paint cup back on. No, I've got a bit of gunk on the outside there, so I'll give all, Mr. Owner, don't panic, I'll give this a thorough clean before it goes back to base and then back to you. Then we'll take the needle and we'll get this. But now I like to get this on my finger like this and mount my finger. So what I don't want to do is jab the needle. Is that on camera? Yeah, I don't want to jab the needle on the sides of the channel it goes into. So very carefully, I'll slot that in. Make sure it's sticking out the other end. I'll get the needle chuck. I'll screw it on tightly. And then what I'll do is I'll just quickly visually check that the needle is moving and then it's sticking out. When I said earlier on that the 0.2 needle was with the 0.4 nozzle and the 0.4 needle was with the 0.2 nozzle, I realised that because the needle wasn't sticking out the nozzle, it was too big for the hole. So I realised then the wrong needle was in the wrong nozzle. So I say I don't know whether that was me that got that wrong, because I was examining it, or whether that was how it turned up. That could have been the cause of some problems. So that's back together. So let's give it another try now. We'll hook it up again and we'll give it another try. And this will tell us, because that should be clean in there now, this will tell us if that overspray on the straight lines is just normal for this. It's just an expected part of using a 0.4 nozzle, and maybe just requires a bit of adjustment with your compressor and your paint thinning amounts. So let me hook that back up and we'll do the test. So back in a moment. Can't believe I broke my brush. Okay, right, what we're going to do now is, now it's all been cleaned, we're going to try the 0.2 needle at 20 psi. This is neat paint, not been thinned at all. And you can see here straight away, apart from my gammy-handed trigger control, because I'm used to a trigger, not a button, it's actually a lot less fuzzy and a lot neater. Not massively, because the 0.2 is actually pretty good anyway. I didn't really see any problems with the 0.2 mil. It wasn't too bad. Yes, yes, very good. Okay, and then last of all, we've got the 0.4 needle and nozzle again, 20 psi, unthinned paint. And you can see here, we now have a much smoother line. Still a little tiny bit of fuzziness, but I'll discuss that a bit later at the end. I did do some other tests, you know, different various thinner ratios and pressures of 20, 25 psi and things like that. But I don't want to show you all of them because you'll be here all day. It did take me quite a while to do all these tests, but just the full clean itself seems to have resolved pretty much most of the overspray problem. We've still got the splatties. You can see the overspray is bigger there, but there are reasons that might cause that are independent of the airbrush. So we'll go into that when I do the finish. So let me edit the video here and we'll go to the big finale, which is a lot of waffling. Trust me, I get carried away and I talk for about 35 minutes. Okay, right, that is all the testing and the cleaning done. Conclusions, well, you can see here from the tests that I have, I tried out both after doing that cleaning. I showed cleaning the 0.2 needle and nozzle set, but then I also went ahead and cleaned the 0.4 as well and did a thorough clean. Now you can see here, I can't remember which is which now, which is dead clever, but these were the 0.2 if I remember rightly. Apologies for the white balance. This was obviously the 0.4 needle because it says 0.4 needle. And I did some little tests and bits and bobs, and I made some discoveries. Now, as I said at the start of this video, a lot of the time problems with an airbrush comes down to gunk cleaning it properly. There's something causing a problem, and 99% of the time that's the case. Occasionally it might be, yes, one of your seals has gone, yes, the end of the needle is knackered, or the nozzle has got a chip or a crack or a break because they're quite delicate. In this case, what I found was, once I'd given it that thorough clean, stripped down and clean, it was fine. The 0.2 needle was fine anyway, so you can see it's marginally better than it was when I sprayed it the first time, so there obviously wasn't anything wrong with the needle or the nozzle. The 0.4 needle was much better. You can see here there's a lot less overspray on the line. Now it's a 0.4 nozzle and needle, so you're not going to get, like I said before, a crisp line. You're always going to get some overspray. It's designed for coverage. It's designed for wide coverage, primers, big base coats, things like that. You're not going to get surgical precision. It's going to be fuzzy around the edges. So it looks like the complete strip down and clean got rid of the fuzz problem and restored the 0.4 needle to its normal operation. Now there were a few, as I did at the start and I did it at the end as well, you can see here there's a few splatty bits where it's gone a bit spider webby, or spiders and things like there. But that's not a fault of the brush, that's down to me because I'm not as used to using that as I am to my Nia. So as I said before, it takes a while to learn how to use an airbrush. So you get comfortable with it, you find it's how it works, you find its sweet spots. So the first time you use an airbrush, you're always going to have some spiders and millipedes and things like that. So end result now is I'm quite happy with how that looks. The 0.2 and the 0.4, they're spraying fine. This was how, let's see if we can find the 0.4. This was how the 0.4 looked at the start. Kind of real massive overspray everywhere. Lines were really fuzzy, and by the end of it, you've got yourself down to nice, defined. Still some overspray, but that's normal for an airbrush. That will depend on how far away you're holding it from the model, your pressure, and how thick the paint is and everything else. So that's down to using the airbrush. That's not down to an airbrush problem. So, good news, Mr. Airbrush owner, your airbrush is actually fine. Not a problem with it at all. Now, he does relate to the idea, or he does actually mention the idea even, of these splats. And you can see I had splats here. And when I did the initial testing, where's it gone? Initial testing, I had some there when you first start painting. Now, what's basically happening there, it's not a fault of the airbrush, it's just getting used to it. Not every airbrush does this, but H&S, these Evolutions do. I spoke to Ted, you know, Ted from the live streams, Skipper Ted. He's got one of these, so I spoke to him as well, because he's very familiar with these. And basically what happens is that occasionally paint will collect in either the nozzle or on the needle tip, or in the little recessed area between the nozzle and the body of the brush and where the nozzle starts. And that's just normal. That's just the way paint builds up as you're spraying. Some of it will gather. Now, what happens is that basically when you hit the air, you're not pulling back for paint, but the air blast will go through, and that may split some of that paint out. It may splot some of that paint out all over the model. So a practice with any airbrush, it doesn't do it on my Neo, but it has done it on other ones. A good practice with any airbrush is exactly the same as when you use a rattle can. If that's your model there, have the airbrush over here, push down for air, then start to move it towards the model and pull back for your paint. You get the paint coming out properly first before it goes anywhere near the model. And it's exactly the same for rattle cans. It's the same principle. When you press the button on a rattle can, the compressed gas inside comes out, and if there's any paint on that nozzle, it will go and spray it everywhere before the normal paint comes out. So it's not a fault of the airbrush. It's a design issue of the airbrush. Yes, it's collecting some paint in there. Now, it can be exacerbated by gunk and dirt and paint residue inside the nozzle housing in that area. If there's a little lump of paint in there that you've missed when you've cleaned it, then paint coming through is going to collect on that, and then you're more likely to get the splots. One thing I noticed when I finished doing the testing was that I had one splot, I think, maybe two, as opposed to when I was doing it before I cleaned it all, when I was getting spot every time I hit the air. So again, Mr. Owner, don't panic. Your brush is fine. It's just that paint does sometimes build up in the nozzle, and it's just one of those things you have to get used to. It doesn't happen with every brush, but speaking to Ted, yes, he has to do the same thing. Start spraying away from the model and move across. Once you've pressed the air the first time and it's gone, then you're fine then. If you're spraying, just if you need to take your finger off the trigger, then when you go back, make sure you air first and then onto the model. It's just good practice. So you will be glad to know that as far as I can see, there was nothing wrong with this brush at all. It just needed a really good clean. I don't know how much you used it, but I don't know much about the Revell paints, but you know my thoughts on Revell anyway. They're quite well known. So it may just be those paints are particularly thick or gloopy and tend to collect around, and even though you've cleaned it out, when I opened it up inside, I took a picture but it didn't come out. When I took the nozzle and everything off, took the needle out, there was quite a bit of gunk inside around the plate that sits here. There's a plate here where with the packing and the housing for the needle, and there's a little gap down the side, but there was some gunk collected in that little air gap and gunk around the edge. So it looks like it just needed a thorough clean. So what I would say is, going forward, make sure you clean it thoroughly. Quick paint change, colour change is fine as you're going on. When you finish for the day, give it a full clean out like I did earlier on with. Get yourself some incidental brushes or a brush kit, anything like that, and loads of cotton buds. And just give it a thorough clean, and you'll find you'll make the brush last a lot longer, and you won't get any problems. If you tend to just do a quick clean like you're changing the colour and that's all you ever do, then eventually you are going to get stuff building up, and then you might get splatter or spray. I've had an airbrush where I had some gunk in the nozzle, a tiny particle of gunk, and when I pressed the button, the paint went like that, and I'm like, hello, that's not right. It's because there was a little particle of gunk. So give your brush a good thorough clean. Now I will say this brush, compared to my Neo, is an absolute doddle to clean, because you pull that out and all the nozzle and everything comes out. You don't need a nozzle spanner. This is a really, really nice brush, Mr. Owner of this brush, and I hate you because you've got it and I want it. So yeah, so you've got a really, really good brush here. There's absolutely nothing wrong with it. The other thing to be aware of as well, and this is where I can't really give 100% concrete advice because I don't know your setup and I don't know your compressor. But one thing I did find was, when I was doing the 0.4 needle at 20 psi, it was still a bit fuzzy. When I dropped it or put it up to 25 psi, it got even more defined and less overspray-y. When you get the level of paint and air just right, it's got even less overspray. So I would say it depends on your compressor. With my compressor, I was finding that perhaps with neat paint, unthinned paint, 20 to 25 psi is pretty good for the 0.4 needle. Now I was using, like I said, I was using the Ammo by MIG paints, and I was both thinning them and not thinning them, but I find no problems spraying those paints through this airbrush neat. Depends what effect you want to get. If you're using the 0.4, put your pressure between 20 and 25. 25 might be better, it'll give you even crisper definition. But if you're just painting a big area, it doesn't really matter if you've got the pressure lower and you get some overspray. It's not the end of the world. Doesn't, because you just say you're priming or something, it's not the end of the world. If you're doing fine work, you might find it better to take the crown cap off and get really close in. Just be conscious of dinging the needle on whatever you're painting. If you're doing fine work with the 0.4 nozzle. You can get quite fine, I did on my tests, but it's not the nozzle designed for that really. The 0.4 nozzle as well is ideal for thick paints like primers, and especially things like metallics, things like Tamiya metallics, because they've got quite a heavy flake. So trying to put it through your 0.2, it's not going to happen unless you thin it to water, and then you're not really spraying the paint. So I would say for your primers, use this 0.4 nozzle. You can thin it a little bit, but if you get in the splats, just like I said, start away from the model and work across, treat it like a rattle can. If you're not happy with the fuzzy edges to the spray line, it doesn't really matter if it's a base coat, but if you want to get it smoother, just up your pressure a bit to about 25 psi, and you should be fine. I'm quite jealous of this. I kind of want one now. The only thing that puts me off is that I'd want a trigger, and I don't know if these come with a trigger. It'd be really cool if they did. Not that I can afford one right now, but yeah. So in conclusion, after all that waffle, I would say this brush is fine. You need to look at your pressure. You need to look at the paints you are using and your thinning ratios. Following the guidelines for a paint, like you say you did it 2 to 1, it was all correct because you used the syringe, that's fine, but it differs from compressor to compressor. So for example, I know Tamiya paints, the official thinning ratio for Tamiya paints is 50% thinner, 50% paint. Through my Neo, I kind of have to do that. I kind of have to, maybe do 30, 70, something like that. I did put some Tamiya paints through this off camera, and I put them through neat. I didn't need to, a little tiny bit thinner. Ammo paints, I have to thin a little bit from my Neo. For these, I could spray them through neat. And the last time I sprayed ammo paints as well, I was using my little compressor, not this big one. So guidelines for thinning ratios are all well and good, but you need to practice with your specific compressor. And keep in mind as well, it also depends, do you have a moisture trap? How long is the hose from the compressor to the airbrush? Is it a thin hose or a fat hose? Because it all makes a difference. It sounds really weird, but the quality of your finish depends on the compressor, the hose from the compressor to the brush. Have you got a moisture trap? If you've not got a moisture trap, you're getting water in your paint, that's going to make it go and ruin your paint job. So I'm assuming you've got a good compressor, and I'm assuming you've got a moisture trap. So make sure you've got a moisture trap. Try different pressures because it will depend on your specific setup. So just putting the paint in the manufacturer's dilution ratio and hoping it'll work might not. So if you're getting fuzziness, up the pressure a bit. If it's a really thick paint like a primer or a metallic, up the pressure. You can go as high as you want. Some people spray up to 30 psi. I mean, typically your 15 to 20 is normal for paints, but it does depend. But Revell paints, I can't tell you. I've never used them. I spoke to a few people and they kind of went, Revell paints for airbrushing. Yeah, you can do it, but it's a bit of a faff. So you might want to look at maybe other paints that might be less hassle to paint with through the airbrush. I know Revell paints are great for brushing. I've never airbrushed them, so I don't know. But I have been told they are a little bit fiddly sometimes to get exactly right. They're quite finicky and you have to get it just right for your setup. So try, if you've got some different paints, try those. Always try it neat first. Try it neat. If it's rubbish, up the pressure. If it's still rubbish, drop the pressure. If it's still rubbish, okay, then you maybe want to look at thinning. The only reason you need to thin a paint is because it's too thick for your airbrush. For this, with a 0.4, a paint's going to struggle to cause any problems, really, I think. But that's it. So I'd say your brush is fine, but do have some experimentations with your pressure and your thinning ratio. It's so different for every single setup. It's different. If you've got two people with the same compressor and the same setup, they'll have different settings because every compressor is different. But in terms of sending this in to get it checked, it was a good idea, because it could have been that the nozzle was cracked. It could have been that the end of the needle, or both needles, was damaged somehow. It could have been a faulty seal inside. It could have been, but it's not. Your brush is fine. Just remember to spray away from the model first, like a rattle can, and play around with your paints and pressures. I would say try a different paint. I would recommend, for airbrushing, you can't beat Tamiya, although you have to thin it quite a bit. It dries really fast and it's rock hard. You can't beat Vallejo Model Air. You just straight from the bottle to the airbrush. You don't need to thin them. They're designed for airbrushes. You've got your Ammo by MIG. They're really, really good. Again, I used it neat and it was fine, but you can thin it. You've got your AK paints. You've got Mr. Colour paints if you're using lacquers. You've got loads of different paints out there. And this says this can use lacquers, by the way, so you should be good with any paint through this brush: enamels, lacquers, or acrylics. So yeah, try some different paints and try different paint thinning ratios. And as far as thinner goes, depends on the paint. But again, there are lots of different thinners out there, so try different paints and thinners. Everybody knows my views on Revell, so my finger is pointing at your setup perhaps just needs to be twiddled a bit, and your Revell paint, it's worth trying something else just to see. But if you ever get the problem again, first thing to do, strip it down, clean it thoroughly, and do that at the end of every day. Don't leave it sat for a week with old paint in it, because once that paint gets really old, it's a real nightmare to get out. So always start that habit of doing a full strip down and clean end of every day. Some people just do a quick colour change and say that's fine. It does work, but at some point it'll bite you in the backside and you have to do a full strip down, so I just do it anyway. And it's get some music on the computer or on your iPod or whatever, and just spend a pleasant 10 or 15 minutes just giving it a strip down and clean. It's quite relaxing. So that's going to do it. I will send this back from whence it came tomorrow. I've missed the postman now, so I shall send it back, and then it will wend its way back to its owner, and I will be dead jealous because I want one of these now. I say it's just this. Although I have to say, the reason I like triggers is because I can't cope with the buttons on airbrushes after a little while because of my funky fingers. I get hand cramps, I get really uncomfortable, but this is actually weighted really, really nicely, and it's a really nice smooth action, and I didn't get any kind of crampiness or uncomfortability on my hands. So who knows, that might even be potential for me, but I still like my trigger. I like the so yeah. Anyway, let me stop waffling now because this has gone on 15 minutes and this is just the wrap up. Thank you so much for watching. This will go back to its owner. In terms of my videos, the Zaku is, I'm just about to start filming the next episode, so that should be hopefully in the next few days. We're going to start with the decals and all that kind of goodness and weathering. Transit van episode is up on the eModels channel now. Go watch it. It'll be up on my channel next week. And then we'll have more good stuff. So it's going to be the Zaku and the Transit ongoing now. So I'll try and get the Zaku videos coming in between the week between eModels posting it and then me posting it on my channel. So I'll try and keep the Zaku going in the middle of there. But yeah, take care of yourselves. Go do something cool. If you've got an airbrush, just remember, 99% of the time, clean it out. It'll probably fix the problem. But until next time, take care of yourselves. Adios, amoebas.